You cannot call yourself a leader that is working towards love and compassion in the world unless you're ready to extend the parameters of your heart to all those that you're currently in rejection to.
This is the Deep Dive with Adam Roa. All right. What is up, Deep Divers? Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Deep Dive podcast. Today, my guest is Nicole Gibson. She's just a badass, quite honestly. She's a badass CEO and founder of the Rogue and Rogue Foundation. And she was the Australian Commissioner for Mental Health. Are you still the Australian Commissioner for Mental Health, Nicole? Is that still happening?
No, I resigned my political career about 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah, but you were. And so like at such a young age, which we're going to get into here, and then Love Out Loud is your community and just movement that is so epic. And where you and I have consistently overlapped and found our alignment is in our desire to choose love and to get people to choose love for themselves first and foremost, and then for the planet. And so having you on this podcast is a real treat for me because we've known each other just a couple years now. Is it a couple years now? And so I've getting a chance to dive deep with you one-on-one. Is it not actually something that we've ever had the opportunity to do? So I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for being on here.
Of course. Other than our podcast last week, which was
our podcast last week. That's the only one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how are you doing today?
You know what? Today's a beautiful day. I woke up feeling in deep gratitude. And then I spent about an hour reflecting deeply around an area of leadership that sort of come up for me as Love Out Loud's growing and scaling. Just regarding like what does love look like in terms of availability to community, and like where's the distribution of my time, where does that need to be? So I've definitely been in like a deep dive around questioning what love looks like specifically in this new phase of growth. So that's really present for me right now.
And so that's something that seems that's really big for me recently. I just released my single Voices, which we talked about. And
great.
Thank you. And so the question that I've been sitting with consistently, and the kind of the theme of that song is, what does love look like? Like, what is the loving choice? And my belief around it being that it's not an empirical. There's not an empirical, this is what love looks like. It's going to be relative to the person giving it, the person receiving it, and the observers of it. And so I'm curious for you, as such a beacon of love, like everyone who knows you can attest to, what is it for you right now that when you say like figuring out what is the loving choice, what is it that you're evaluating, so we can get a little behind the scenes into your own search for finding that loving choice?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the space to explore this, because I really am like thinking out loud as I share. I guess what's been present with me through this process, and I know that all of you guys can relate and appreciate that sometimes, choosing love, you're finding yourself on a leading edge and not necessarily having role models to follow. I think this embodiment and devotion to love is not something that has really been seen in leadership throughout our lifetimes that often. So you find yourself in positions where you're literally you're needing to scope that out as you go. And I guess what's been present for me is, as Love Out Loud scales and grows and is impacting more and more people, many founders have this challenge. You can't be necessarily personally available to every single person. And that doesn't mean, the human in me and in my heart doesn't care for every single person. I wish I had more hours in the day to be able to be so available. So I guess the conflict that can arise is the thought of needing to not be so available to the single person, which is where I believe all the change really needs to happen, is how present you are with the person in front of you. Unless we can be that, then it doesn't matter what incredible mission and vision we're serving. We're not actually being in integrity with that message. The conflict comes in when I'm needing to make decisions that are, one, impacting people that I'm never going to meet, and really thinking about things from a very collective macro point of view, and knowing like that there's so much importance in humanizing those individuals, but actually not having the capacity to be able to do so means that you're really needing to evaluate like your own heart and what you feel, and really trusting that what you feel is ultimately, and your truth is ultimately what's right for everyone else.
Yeah, well said. And this is something that I personally have struggled with and had to learn how to navigate, essentially, as the social media following was growing. Right. Previously, it was I answered every message that I got personally, every comment, every message, that for years and years and years. And then once my poem went viral, I still had that mindset to do it, and yet I was like breaking down. Like it was taking me so much time. And we're entering into a more and more digital age. Like even people who aren't trying to be influencers or anything like that, so there's still more and more communication that is happening online through social media and digital platforms. How have you found to the balance of being that loving voice in person while still navigating more and more interactions happening online? Because I feel like it is something where I can put out a poem or something and see it get 100,000 views, and that means so much less than the one person that I run into in person somewhere, like pre-COVID, when I actually ran into people, and they're like, that poem helped me in one of my darkest times. And that one interaction I remember for the next 3 months, as opposed to all of those views. By the next week, often I'm thinking about the next thing, and the views almost lose their meaning. And so I'm curious for you how you navigate that, especially since you have such a beautiful online community yourself with Love Out Loud.
Yeah, it's a really powerful question, because I relate to what you're sharing. Like that, I'm very into the raw human experience, and that's what touches me when someone's in front of me and I'm seeing their emotion, I'm seeing the way the work's impacted them, I'm experiencing them, I have the honor to actually hold them. And I guess the way that I've reconciled that in a digital context is just really being the same me, no matter how I'm showing up. And that has, I guess, allowed me to recognize that if that one person's explaining the way that Love Out Loud's transformed their life, that one person is a representation of all of the people that we're touching online as well. And to just keep reminding community that love knows no bounds. That's a really big part of what I believe. And whether we're in different countries or time zones, or ultimately the one thing that we're sharing that we're never going to be able to escape from is this present moment right now. It doesn't matter where we are or what we're up to, that is unifying us. So I think keeping connected to the humanity inside every human being is a really, really big piece in how I stay connected to that, and holding on to those moments that I get to have in person, and then showing up transparently. I think that's the other thing, is just keep continually being raw and real. It doesn't matter if it's on Zoom or Facebook or Instagram or in person, just be the same you, no matter what the context is. And be real about your values and leadership. I think that's the other thing. It's like, don't people please. Sometimes you need to stand for things that are other people consider controversial or edgy, but I think it's really important that you stay in your integrity as a leader.
And that, I imagine, to be something that you encountered a lot of pushback on, as being so, when you were doing the political thing as the Australian ambassador for mental health. Can you give people, just so that they know, you retired 2 years ago from that. But let people know, because you were the youngest. Were you 18? How old were you at the time? I can't remember exactly.
It was just before my 20th birthday that I was appointed. Yeah.
19. So give people reference to what I'm speaking to here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy, it was a crazy journey. Usually as a commissioner, you get hired into that role or chosen for that role in the later part of your career because of your expertise. So a commissioner comes on to essentially advise the federal budget. So there are very few commissioners for each portfolio. My portfolio is mental health. When I stepped onto the commission, it was sitting under the Prime Minister's portfolio because it was considered a cross-portfolio issue, as in it wasn't just health, it was also education, housing, so on. So it had multiple portfolios, and those portfolios generally sat under the PM. So that was my direct line. I was giving recommendations to the Prime Minister. I was the youngest by about 40 years. Pretty much the only female. I was the only one with lived experience in the thing that I was advising, and no clinical background. So the way that I found myself in that position was on my 18th birthday, I founded a nonprofit, which Adam mentioned before, the Rogan Rouge Foundation. I led that organization for 8 years, and basically I founded that after a very intense lived experience with an eating disorder, and went through a lot of the clinical avenues to find recovery and rehabilitation, but found myself just getting sicker and sicker. And I had a hypothesis that was maybe there's cultural reasons why I've been conditioned to punish myself and hate myself. And maybe if culture changed, then there would be a shift. And then environment was the second part that I hypothesized as well, which seems obvious, to us now. And it's becoming more and more of a mainstream conversation. Like, hey, maybe there are toxic cultures. Maybe there's, reasons why people are so stressed and anxious. But 10 years ago, that was considered a very left field proposition. And what doctors very much told me was that my condition was a biological predisposition and I would never recover from it. I'd only learn to manage it at best. And I completely rebelled against that and founded an organization that took a very different approach. The approach was to work directly with communities and essentially listen. So just to give a bit of context to how we approach the work was we'd go into communities, and it was actually just me at the very beginning, but I started to build a team around me. But in the very beginning, I would go into communities. I would look at who the stakeholders of that community were. So it might have been the school students, the parents, the teachers, the service providers, the council, so on. And I'd spend a whole day just listening, asking them questions around their culture, their environment, their community, what their views on the other stakeholders of the community were, and basically gave no advice, perspective, opinion. And I would do that with every stakeholder group. And then at the end, I would bring them together in a forum and I would just relay what I heard. And basically what they would discover in that space was actually how they all wanted the same thing. But there was so much that was getting lost in translation. And so through hearing people and seeing people and then giving people a space to hear and see each other, what started to happen was really, really, really profound shifts in community. Like schools that had an attendance rate of like 15% after 6 months had 70, 80%. Communities that had really high rates of addiction and suicide started to transcend the increasing statistics every single year to a place where it was actually improving. And so these results were really profound. And obviously I was a kid. I was 18, 19 years old doing this work. I was bootstrapping. I was a young social entrepreneur with, $1 to my name, and I was living in my van. And the first major cash injection I had was 50 grand from a corporate sponsor. And that lasted a year. And I traveled to 300 communities in my van on 50 grand. So I put this as an advocacy piece and a story to government, and basically just said, we don't need billions of dollars to change the mental health epidemic. We need humanity and we need presence. And before I knew it, I had a call from the Prime Minister's office asking me to become a commissioner because it was such a revolutionary concept that maybe, just maybe, by actually being with each other and embracing each other in our humanity, people would start to heal. So my role in that position as a commissioner was essentially to have a budget shift from acute crisis intervention, because at that point, over 95% of our federal budget in Australia, and it's quite similar in the States and the UK as well, was being spent on crisis intervention, meaning the government was waiting for there to be a critical problem before any money was spent. So it was completely reactive. And my job was to advise solutions in what's now known as early intervention and prevention, but they weren't really terms that were used 10 years ago.
So now hopefully everyone listening has an understanding of how badass Nicole is in terms of the willingness to be yourself. So what led to that was like, you know, be authentic in leadership and being authentic. And so to be a 19-year-old kid basically stepping into this political system, mostly men, mostly in their 50s or older probably, and to I have never known you to be anything but a straight shooter. Like literally speak exactly what's on your mind, be willing to trigger whoever that triggers but just like because you're standing in your truth around that. How did you, I feel like so many people when they get into certain situations, like whether it's a job situation or whatever, there's a almost fear of owning their truth or their voice because of the repercussions of like, oh, now I have this job, I don't want to lose it. Or now I'm in this relationship, I don't want them to break up with me, or whatever it might be. How did you manage to stay true to yourself in that sort of circumstance where I imagine so many other people would have probably caved to a lot of the pressure I imagine you experienced or the backlash?
Yeah, this is a very, very powerful question. And the essence of this question is something I'm so passionate about, which is what I'm hearing is how do you stay connected to your truth, even when no one around you is validating that, you know? And part of what you just asked was people are afraid that they're going to lose something. And I guess from my life's journey, what I came to recognize was you have so much more to lose, you know, when you're abandoning your truth than whatever falls away from stepping into it. And there's a huge cost, and I lived that cost. So it wasn't something that I had to learn through experience, and I'm grateful that I experienced that at a very young age, because when I was going through anorexia, that illness had infiltrated my mind, my spirit, to essentially put me in a position where I was believing that self-sacrifice and believing that I wasn't enough to chase this idea of perfection had brought me down a road where I was suffering every second of every day, truly believing that at the end of that suffering was going to be enoughness and happiness, which is completely ridiculous. But that was the thought process that I was in to eventually get to that place, and then need to come to terms with the fact that I was actually unwell. So imagine being in pain every single day, like extreme pain, starvation every single day. Didn't sleep a good night's sleep in 4 years. So I was in chronic pain every day, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, to get to a point where all of that pain was not only for nothing, but you were actually being held against your will and having your voice and dignity completely taken from you and needing to try and reconcile that. So the recovery process, I guess, started when I made a very sacred and deep commitment to myself to never allow myself to abandon me. And I experienced the cost. The cost was almost my life, and I still wasn't enough for those around me, so being in those environments, it was intimidating. But there was an unshakable knowing in me that I was never going to allow myself to abandon my truth again, and to abandon my spirit, and to abandon my own heart. And I think that when we do that, yeah, like maybe we get to keep the relationship or whatever, but I see it as a slow form of suicide. What I was in was I was not alive. It was a slow form of suicide, and there was nothing, that was ever going to be a temptation for me to lose myself again. No amount of, success or acceptance, or I would have much preferred to be crazy and alone and completely misunderstood, but in my truth, than to have all of the things and not be in my truth.
Yeah, it's such a funny thing because what you're speaking to, what I hear is around hitting essentially that rock bottom, right? They refer to it as that rock bottom, where from there you can only go up. And so even when you're in a situation where there might be a lot to lose, quote unquote, it's like, no, I've been to the bottom, and so there's nothing as
you can
scary
take
as
from
that.
me. Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me because I feel like I hit that space last year, where I was just going through such a deep depression and really struggling. And I was seeing multiple therapists and detoxing my physical body and just calling on all the support I could. I went down to the jungles of Peru to sit in ceremonies and just everything. And the thing I'm curious about and would love your opinion on is generally what happens when in the transformational world and personal development and working through different aspects of our growth is that just kind of biologically, the ego wants to keep things the same because it knows it's safe in the same, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful, like being the same is at least safe. We're surviving this. And it takes getting to a place where staying the same is so uncomfortable that people are saying it's actually less uncomfortable to change.
Yeah.
And that is a very common pattern. That's where we get the breakdown to the breakthrough as a common saying, is like when it gets so uncomfortable that to stay the same, that's when people change. And I've always been fascinated by the idea that it doesn't have to be that way, right? Yeah. We don't have to wait for that breakdown. We don't have to wait for life to get so uncomfortable that we decide to make that change. And yet at the same time, that rock bottom that you and I have experienced in our lives in different ways is the thing where I go, nothing's as scary as that. Nothing's as scary as that. So when people say, oh, you seem like you're so courageous and fearless and you just do this. Oh, you're going to make music now. Okay, do that. But well, it's like, it's not as scary as that. Nothing is. Do you think people have to get to that place? Like, do you feel like that's the only way that you find that strength?
Such a great question. No, I don't. If my experience has taught me anything, it's to put myself in the position of being a student and an observer more, and to learn from other people's wisdom. Like through that experience, I was the kid that had to touch the stove 10 times just to, triple, quadruple check that it was still hot. Like I couldn't take my mom's word for it. Mom said the stove's hot, don't touch it. I was like, is it though? Is it really? Is it still? What about now? And that's in my nature, because I like to, I don't know, I guess be that the explorer and the hero. Like it's very, I think, innate to my personality to want to do it myself. But through that experience, there's a humility that I guess I've accessed, which is I can look at someone like Nelson Mandela's journey as an example, very famous example, the forgiveness that he demonstrated after 27 years in incarceration. I now look at that and I'm like, you get to be a giant that I stand on the shoulders of and pay homage to. You've already paved that possibility for humanity, that we have such an immense power to forgive. So do I need to go and be in prison for 27 years to then discover that I have it in my heart to forgive those who incarcerated me? I don't necessarily have to experience that to know on a quantum level that that's possible. And it's a part of our human experience. So I become very attuned to that, and I've become very available to other people's wisdom, especially people that embody, things that I want to embody now. And I think that's been a really big part of my progression in my journey, is my capacity. Because like I was sharing, such a big part of my initial work was to listen to others' stories. And through that, I unlocked, I was listening to people's stories in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And I got to hear that wisdom and take that on board without necessarily needing to go and have those exact experiences.
See, such a massive point. I hope that really landed for people in recognizing that, and tying this to the fact that we are all connected. We are all the same. Like deep down in our cores, like we all come from the same place, and we are just these fractal bits of consciousness, but of this one source consciousness that we will go back to at some point and we're all a part of. And so what's amazing about that is when you see the strength of someone else, like a Nelson Mandela or a Nicole Gibson, we have this opportunity to go, that's in me too. The strength that they're showing is in me too. The compassion that they are showing there, the ability to forgive, but that's, I think what's scary about that is I think we know that intrinsically. I think that's why, we love the underdog stories, and we love we love our mythology around that, because deep down we know that that's in us too. We can feel it. And I think that's why it's so scary to see like what's happening on the planet with politics and various other things, and pedophilia rings and just like all of this stuff, because the shadow, I think inherently we also know that's in us too.
100%.
And so that's scary to actually go.
Yeah, to take responsibility for.
Right. And no, that's me.
Yeah.
The rapist, the killer, the whatever, that's me. That's in me too. That possibility exists in me.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something that I believe like all of us need to reconcile if we want to see healing. In fact, I'm drawing a very like firm line around this in my own leadership at the moment, that you cannot call yourself a leader that is working towards love and compassion in the world unless you're ready to extend the parameters of your heart to all those that you're currently in rejection to.
Have you been hearing that you should love yourself more? Is that something that has consistently popped up in your space, but you're not exactly sure how to do that? That's why I created the course. It starts with you, self-love made simple, because self-love is not simply turning on a light switch. It's not like you have it or you don't. It's actually the byproduct of the relationship that you have with yourself. And just like any other relationship in your life, if you want there to be love, it looks like how much time do you invest into it? And what do you do? What do you say? What are the activities that you put into those relationships? The same is true for yourself. And so what I've done is I've gathered 15 of the most impactful, powerful, potent exercises that have helped me reach millions with self-love. And I've put them into a video course so that you can apply them to your life and deepen your relationship with yourself, learn to love yourself more, increase your self-worth and your value, which will call in more financial abundance. It'll call in deeper connections with the people around you. It'll call in more joy and love and fun into this life. Because at the end of the day, while you may not be able to control everything that's happening around you, you can control how you respond to that. Directly the result of how much you love yourself and how much you feel your worth. And so if you have been looking for a way to increase your internal value system and up-level your entire life, I encourage you to check out my new video course. It starts with you.
And that's an edge for a lot of people to be like, okay, that is like, I am you, you are me. And if I want to heal, if I want to use my life and my vessel and my physical body and my heart and my capacity to forgive as a vehicle to heal the collective, then I need to be able to extend the barriers of my heart outward to those who are causing pain and harm to others. because that's the only way that they heal. You know, we can't fight hate with more hate. We can't fight for peace. Like, if we want peace, we need to be peaceful. If we want love, we need to love. And this is when I think the conversation of love and what choosing love looks like starts to enter a territory that not many people are prepared to venture to, which is, it's easy to love those who love us. It's easy to love those, you know, who are working towards the light and showing up in a way that we deem loving and acceptable. It's really fucking hard to love those who are not showing up like that, because we need to recognize that they are an aspect of us, and through our perception, we're perceiving them. You're actually, and this is going really deep, we're actually seeing, you know, these shortcomings, or however they're being, in them. Therefore, we have a responsibility in how we're holding them, the space that we're creating for them, what we're magnifying, because when we see each other, the way in which we see each other is going to magnify that aspect of one another. That's the power that we have in coexisting. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing the innocence in these people? Are you doing the work inside yourself to actually see that innocence, to see that divinity? You know, because that takes work. It takes work.
You just got me that I couldn't help but go, yeah, because the key piece there, and I saw what you were just saying there, a bunch of we're doing, for people listening, we're doing this podcast right now live in the Create community. And we got so many people that were resonating with what you were just sharing, Nicole, here in the comments. And what you just said is, have you been doing the work on yourself to see the divinity in them? And that is something that I try and get across as much as I can to people, is an understanding that when you see something in someone else that you dislike, your ability to identify that is because it exists in you. Like, you've had experience of it. You're able to see the reflection that it is. And the way that you have compassion for that is by having learned how to love it within yourself.
Yeah.
So in order for us to be able to love someone who got so angry that they went out and killed someone, we have to be able to have come into harmony and peace with the aspects of ourselves that are capable of doing that. The aspects of ourselves that are so scary to us, that allow us to go, wow, I can understand how they may have done that.
Yeah. To hold that. And it's like, what is the only difference between, say, me or you guys who feel that same level of rage and don't choose to act? Because that's the only differentiating choice. The difference between a prophet and someone in prison ultimately is their choice. You know, the choices they've made in their life. The spectrum of their humanity is actually the same. What's different is their choices. So the difference between someone that's experiencing that rage that doesn't make that decision, really it comes down to their ability to self-regulate. So how do we find compassion? You know, like, for those of us that have access to self-regulation, there's a degree that we need to really be grateful for that access, because that self-regulation as a baby, as a child, you know, if you're doing that work as an adult, comes from having the opportunity to be held in enough of your emotion to start to learn how to self-regulate. So someone that has zero capacity to self-regulate has most likely never been held, you know, in the ways that they need to learn how to self-regulate. And when you start to see the innocence in that, and I'm not saying that I stand by any of these actions, but what I do understand is human behavior and how we're wired as emotional beings, and our psyche is very fragile. When we've never been given that love, compassion, and space, you know, we're going to make irrational choices. And does someone deserve, you know, to be hated for that?
Yeah. And something that shifted a lot for me was taking on this particular viewpoint. And maybe this will resonate with the listeners here, which is that if I believe that if I was put into the exact same life as anyone else, I would be exactly where they are. So what I mean by that is take the rapist in prison. If I had been born into their life and experienced all of the same exact events that they experienced moment by moment, not a single difference. If I experienced exactly the same thing, I would be making the exact same choices as them. And the reason why that was so powerful for me to get to that point is in recognizing that if you believe that if given the exact same upbringing, exact same mom, exact same dad, exact same sexual abuse or domestic violence or whatever those experiences are, if you were given the exact same moment to moment everything, and you believe you would not have made the same choices, I believe what that implies is some level of thinking of almost like a spiritual hierarchy, as if like my soul is better than their soul. As if my soul somehow would know more morality better than them.
And well, let's just break that down. Like, what is morality? You know, like to really break that down, because I so agree with what you're saying, and I think that spiritual high road, you know, where people, it's righteousness, and like all the greatest prophets in the world have taught the importance of humbling ourselves in the face of that righteousness, and the fact that, you know, morality is a construct. Like, we have a moral compass, but who's governing that moral compass? It's down to our experiences and the privilege, actually, that those who have a high moral compass have had in their lives to be able to even think about what morality is. Because if your morality in your brain is situated in your frontal cortex, someone that's murdering someone is not operating from their frontal cortex. They're right back at a primitive brain. They're making extremely reactive choices. It's like a matter of life and death for them. That's where they're operating from. So even to be in a space where you're able to access that part of your brain in a way is a privilege. You know, if you have a life that's allowing you to be creative, that's allowing you to think morally and ethically, not everyone has access to that. The part of that brain is actually completely shut down.
And that was something that I got to learn and experience in myself when I was going through a lot of this healing process around the PTSD in my body from sexual abuse. I got the opportunity to observe how much my nervous system was in a state of fight or flight without, I'd never known it. So if you imagine going through your entire life in a state of fight or flight, which means that at least some of the blood flow from the prefrontal cortex, which is that logical, rational thinking part of your brain, is going back into that protective primal limbic system brain. As it's doing that, then imagine the people that grow up and continue to live in those environments. Imagine the people in inner cities that are worried about getting robbed, shot, attacked, just whatever in major cities. Think about even just being around all of the mechanical sounds of buses. Imagine the air toxicity of these big cities in like China and whatever, the amount of humans on this planet that are in an agitated state that is affecting their prefrontal cortex and keeping them in that reptilian, limbic, primal, like I have to survive mindset is staggering. It's staggering. And so to what you're speaking to, in my mind, the importance of this comes back to the giving people the tools for how to calm the nervous system and allow for a sense of safety, whether it's through self-regulation and also various other tools that will allow them to move out of that fight or flight instinct and allow that space of rational thought, which also allows that space of the compassion and the understanding.
Yeah, 100%. It's, again, like putting people in a situation where they're going to be defined by their choices forever doesn't actually allow them to ever shift or grow. And that's like, education is ultimately the way, you know, being held in a space where there's a different possibility presented to you, but the level of forgiveness that is required from those around someone who's made these choices is so immense for them to actually have a space to step into where change would become possible for them. And it's sort of like, I think there's levels of this. Like, you see the same thing play out in addiction. Unless an addict has a space to actually get to know who they are away from the addiction, they're most likely they're not going to change. They're not going to shift. They need someone to see something in them that is beyond that addiction, and then they need enough grace to be able to recreate an identity outside of that past in order for them to transcend that identity. And is it not the same for anyone that's acted in a violent or hateful way? Like, if they're constantly reminded of that every single moment and continually identified with that, then they've essentially their growth has been put on hold. They can't grow beyond that, no matter what they do or how hard they try. And I think this is why in the justice system we see so many repeat offenders, because they're always seen as a criminal. And if you're always seen as a criminal, then you're going to be a criminal.
Yeah. And that's the power of forgiveness as well. Speaking to it from the lens that we've been talking today, is when the people who are that are acting out like significantly, there is an aspect of self-loathing underneath there. There's an aspect of anger and judgment, and a powerful aspect of forgiveness is, once again, we inherently see ourselves in other people. And so when you can hold compassion and forgiveness for someone else, you might be allowing them to see that they can forgive themselves. You might be the first reflection in their entire life that they are worth forgiving. And so when you can walk through the world with compassion and forgiveness as a way of being, and openness and way of being, you are granting an incredible amount of permission for people to forgive themselves and fall in love with themselves. And Ruth has a great comment here. She says, it's difficult, if not impossible, to express emotions or behaviors that you've never experienced or had modeled for you in early life. And people can be socially disabled in a sense by the way they grew up. And so that's 100% Ruth. And so what's amazing about that is, like, now it's not too late. Yes, you develop so much in those early stages, but like, if we were all walking around, imagine if there was one person on the planet, one like murderous type person, and everyone else on the planet was love and forgiveness and light. Do you think that person's going to go around and kill everyone on the planet? Like, they are going to see this reflection and ultimately have that modeled in a way that will shift them. And the issue that I'm seeing right now is that there's so many people that are modeling a separatist mentality. They're modeling it's us versus them. It's Trump versus Biden. It's pro-guns or pro-life, or like, it's all of these religions, it's different things. It's this country versus that country. It's this separatist mentality, and it's going to prevent us from modeling for each other that behavior and activating the ability for us to see that in each other. And I think that that's why I'm so grateful for people like you and the communities and the community like Create, where when people come into this community and experience an event, every single time, whether it's a house party or an open mic night or a poetry night or whatever it is, they go, I didn't know it was like this. Everyone in here knows that that's the thing. They're like, I didn't realize this was happening here, because people don't have a reference point. They can't actually imagine what goes on these calls. And so I just want to say thank you, Nicole, because I know every time I've met you, and everyone who knows you speaks to how strongly and fiercely you stand for everything you're speaking about today.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I believe so much in what you're sharing. We need to transcend separation if we want to experience unity. Like, it's simple as that.
Self-explanatory.
Yeah, it's so simple, you know. But we've got to reconcile ourselves. You know, that's the key. if there's parts of you that you're rejecting, you cannot hold those space, that you can't hold that space for someone else.
And that is why it always comes back to self-love. It always comes back to self-love. And so let me ask you, as we come a bit full circle here, in terms of, like, we've talked a lot about everything we're talking about really is about relationships. And that's kind of my theme for this podcast. It's the theme in Create Premium this month. And as we focus on relationships, we've talked about the relationship we have with other people and the relationships with ourselves. One of my big, something I live by is that love is unconditional, relationships are not. And so as we opened up this, you were talking about even navigating your own boundaries from a loving space. And so I'm curious, how do we apply what we're talking about and this complete compassion and everything? How do we apply that while still holding firm boundaries for our own self-love? How are you navigating that? Because I know it's alive for you now.
Yeah, this is a powerful question. I mean, we spoke about this in a really incredible way on the Love Out Loud podcast last week. And I guess for me, the deeper I go into my own journey of self-love, the more I fully realize, which means to see the truth. That's what the word realize means. The divinity that I am. And once upon a time, I used to look, at the ocean and the birds, or a dog, or a child, or someone, a lover that I was in love with. And I would see God in them, and I would fall into that. I would fall into the sunset. I would fall in love with them. And the more I started to develop my own self-love, I started to realize that I wasn't falling, because I was just seeing myself. I was standing in love. I was standing for love. I was recognizing that what I was seeing was me. And the first experiences where I met God in those ways, like the moments I'll never forget, it was like literally getting brought to my knees at the realization that through self-rejection, through self-punishment, through self-harm, I was rejecting, the miracle that exists inside of me. And it was no longer about me. It was about it was no longer about my concept of self. It was the embracing that God exists in me and works through me. And it's my responsibility to love that, which is the least all of us can do. We can't fathom how loved we are. We can't. It's not cognitively possible for us to fathom. We live in a universe where everything we choose to be, every wish we have, every prayer we offer is granted. If you're not experiencing that, it's just because you're not conscious of the thoughts that you're projecting out into the world beyond you. But that is the truth of how loved we are. It's unconditional. Truly, truly, truly is unconditional. And that's what we are. And it's so unconditional. And this is the crazy paradox of living in this 3D reality, or for you guys, maybe 5D or 10D, whatever realities you're living in here on Earth's floor, is that we're so loved in such an unconditional way that we get to choose what our life looks like. And I guess for me, that's how I've reconciled my boundaries and the choice of choosing my own adventure, choosing the sorts of relationships I want to be next to and close to, what friendship means to me. Like sometimes I'll challenge people when they're like, oh, you're my friend, or that person's my friend. And I'll say really, why? Because I think a lot of people just have friendships that are convenient. They go to the same gym, or they went to school together, and therefore they're a friend. I try and be really intentional about what friendship means to me. I don't have a huge amount of friends for that reason, because I want that's sacred to me. But that doesn't mean that the God that's in me isn't in all things. It's just the recognition. It's fully being able to receive the fact that that's what I am, and that is actually limitless. I think it's painful as a human being to try and reconcile our infinite nature with our finite experience. There are conditions to this experience, time and gravity, and all of these things are conditional. To be able to embrace that limitlessness and then to recognize that through the conditions and the boundaries, that's actually what creates meaning. Because as human beings in this experience, if I was going to be Nicole Gibson forever, or if I was to sleep with every single person I was attracted to, or if I was to be friends with every single person, all of a sudden nothing would have any meaning. So the only way that we can really find sentiment, I believe, and sacredness is through having some sort of boundary, and that's actually bringing us closer to God, through this human experience. And it's like we're made in the face and image, but we're also imperfect at the same time.
Mic drop on that one, Nicole. Yeah, and I couldn't agree any more with the idea that it's in the contrast, right? It's not necessarily in the separation, but the boundaries give us contrast, and it's in our contrast that we find ourselves. And the experience of being human is a remembering of ourselves. It is a remembering of the paradoxical nature of reality, which is that we are ourselves and we are everyone and everything at the same time. And we have these moments and these experiences of that connectedness that remind us. And the danger that I see for a lot of people, and I know that I experienced this because of how unsafe I felt on the planet for so long, I definitely felt like spirituality was an escape from this life. It was a way for me to get out of this experience, and like deep meditations or plant medicine or whatever, it was a way of going home and really recognizing that we have an opportunity through these moments where, like you said, brought to your knees, of being touched by divinity, and recognizing that, to carry that with us and to add it to who we are and move through the world as a reflection of that for other people, and just continue to add that, because there's nothing less divine or less sacred about our individuality. It is just as sacred. It is everything. And so as we can honor the connectedness that we all feel, we can also honor the individuality that we can feel. And I'm so appreciative. It doesn't look like there's any questions actually from the audience today, which is because you just had everyone spellbound by what you were saying. It was really, really beautiful. So I want to honor and acknowledge you for just the courage to walk this path and speak it. I can only imagine what you have gone through to become the person that you are. And like I said at the very beginning of this, Nicole, you are a badass. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find you and Love Out Loud and just all the stuff that you're up to?
Thank you. And thanks to all of you guys for being in this conversation. So beautiful. We need more, conversations change the world. I just really want to share that I really feel these conversations are the conversations that change the world, and we need to have more of them. And thank you, Adam, for constantly facilitating them and being in that question. I feel like anyone in the Create community is a Love Out Louder, whether or not you know it, is thing. So please jump into our community. We have a free community on Facebook of tens of thousands of us everywhere that just love. So you can find that at Love Out Louders, like Louders. It's a group on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, Nick Gibson _NIC Gibson, or Facebook as well. But if you jump into the Love Out Louders group, you'll see me in there as well with links to everywhere else.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And yeah, and for everyone listening to this, the Create community family, like Nicole said, the exposure, like we talked about today, the exposure to compassion, the exposure to love is the reflection that people sometimes need to see it in themselves. And so these conversations can be that exposure, because you are giving people a reflection of a way of thinking or a way of viewing things that they may have never had before. So I highly encourage you to treat these conversations, this podcast or the Love Out Loud podcast or any others that you resonate with, as medicine in that way. They can be tools to help spread the reflections that you're talking about. Send them to your loved ones, send them to your communities, post them in your Facebook groups. Allow people to experience a version of reality they may not have experienced before, so they know that it exists and they can find it within themselves if they choose to. And so, thank you everybody for being a part of this. The one question here, Shari, is can you Love Out Louders, can you post? Can't find it, Nick, on Facebook, Love Out Louders. So is it, it's 3 different words, right? 3 words, Love Out Louders.
Love Out Louders. Here's the link.
There's the link. There's the link, everybody. Get it now, because we're going to be closing out this Zoom call. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. Thank you, Nicole, for just being you and being willing to take your time. I know you're busy and getting in here. I made it past the boundary of honoring your time, and now I have your time for an hour, and it's been so good to get to sit down with you last week on your podcast and for you to jump on the deep dive with me. I love you. I appreciate you. And for all of the listeners and the watchers on YouTube and everywhere, I want to remind you that always, in all ways, you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Have a beautiful rest of your day.